Hi guys. As a reminder, my name is Laura Leonard, and this is going to be my last presentation for you all. I hope everything's going well as you finish up your data analysis and start to work on your presentations and your final reports. Quickly with this lecture, we'll be covering how to do effective presentations, and this will be useful for not just field session, but any presentation you might do in the future. These are good tips to keep in mind when doing presentations. And as a reminder, this is what we like to call the presentation. So we'll jump in here. It's good in general with most presentations to start with an overview. This provides context and a timeline, if you will, for your audience so they know why they're here and where you plan to go with your presentation. So here I have a quick overview for you where we'll start by covering the purpose of the presentation and how to help create your outline. And then we'll cover the structure of a presentation, which includes fonts, graphs and charts, color schemes and backgrounds. We'll cover citations, and then finish up with how to present yourself with the fact that this will be through Zoom. We'll keep that in mind, and we have some additional tips for you all. And then we'll finish with just some additional tips and then conclusions. So let's start off with what is the purpose. So as you guys begin to plan your presentation and set up an outline, which you should do, it's good to identify the following. First, who is your audience, which would be not only your clients, but also us and your professors. And then follow up with what is the purpose of this presentation? Why are you doing it? What is the problem and what is your solution? So you were given these objectives that you need to find solutions for. So that can be a good outline for your story and how you're going to present each objective and your conclusions supported with data. Additionally, when you're thinking about your audience and how you'll be presenting this presentation, first, don't assume everyone in the audience is an expert. So try to keep in mind that there may be some terms you need to identify that maybe not everyone will know what specific aspects of your work you're talking about. You might need to provide more context, but don't underestimate them either. So be sure to kind of have, an in-between here and keep in mind all audience members, and be sure to use the context of previous videos and understanding who your clients are so that you can do your best to, again, not underestimate them, but don't leave them confused with maybe jargon or terminology they don't understand. Next, it's good to keep in mind a structure. So that's why I keep mentioning an outline. That would be good for you all to set up for each presentation, each of your individual presentations. And you can think of this with this figure here. It's good to start broad in your introduction, then get specific within your storyline, get specific with each objective, the data, and what you've discovered, and then end broad again with what's the big picture? Why does this matter? And how could maybe, this help with future work as well? So the middle of the presentation is your meat, where you're really going to be hitting the data and your analysis, and then you're starting and ending broad. So as you all probably know, there are several components of a presentation, starting with a title slide. Definitely make sure you have a title slide, and be sure to provide your group names, the date, and the place. It's good to add the class as well. Also, following with that title slide, it's good, like we just discussed, to have an overview. So you can provide an agenda or an outline of the following slides so that, again, the client and the audience know what your plan is for this presentation. Once you're done with that, it's good to have an intro. So just discuss what you plan on presenting, why it's important, provide any background information you might need that will help with the rest of the following slides. Then there's the body, which we kind of just discussed is the meat of the presentation. And with that, you have your results and discussion, which has graphs and tables. And then you will provide a conclusion. And then it's also good to have a question slide, just so that everyone knows that you finished your presentation and you are now ready for the questions section of your presentation. So let's start with slide structure. So again, it's always good to have that title at the top of your presentation that you can see here. And then it's always good to write in bullet points. Don't write in paragraphs, because the whole point of the presentation is for you to be engaging with the client and the audience, and for you to be discussing your results, while the slides are just providing, again, kind of that outline and agenda for you, and more just the visuals to help aid in the discussion. A good thing to remember is page numbers. It's very good to have page numbers, because this will help, especially with the audience, to keep track of maybe of specific slides they might want to discuss later on with questions. So if they have a question and you had several slides, they can say, let's go back to slide 6. I want to discuss that chart on slide 6. So page numbers, don't forget that. Also make sure with your page numbers that they match your format. Don't have, I don't know, a bright pink number or a weird color or a weird font. Make sure the font matches. It's an easy to see color. Maybe bold it too if it's difficult to see. So with your slides, also include, an average of 4 to 5 points per slide. Don't overdo it, again, with too much information. You can always use multiple slides if you have a lot you want to say about a subject. You don't need to put it all on one slide. And again, avoid wordiness. Use just keywords and phrases that can help guide your thought process, which you can then discuss further just in person or through Zoom this time. But the slides are meant to just help you keep track of where you are and just give an overview to the audience. So here is a bad example. So there's a bullet point, but we've just got a paragraph copy and pasted here. And don't try to read this. So if I just read, this page contains too many words for a presentation slide. It is not written in point form, making it difficult for you and your audience to read and for you to present each point. See how that's kind of boring? I'm not reading what's here. I'm just using the bullet points to help me understand what I'm trying to tell you all. So don't make it wordy. The less words, the better, I think. All right, so moving on. Fonts are good to keep in mind. This is kind of a debate. Some people don't care as much about fonts. Since I took field session, I've been converted to this theory, so I'm just going to share it with you all, and you can do what you will with this information. But the theory is it's good to use rounded fonts. They're easier on the eyes, especially on a large screen. Additionally, use at least 18-point font. Obviously, there's certain circumstances where maybe you do need to go smaller. This isn't a set rule, but the bigger the better. So that's across the board. That's a good future self tip. For Zoom meetings, obviously everyone will be seeing your screen, and we'll cover that a little bit later here, how to share screens. But you have to your advantage the fact that everyone will have a screen in front of them. So you can try to use that creatively, and knowing that normally when you present, you might be in a lecture hall where the people in the back need you to use an 18-point font or higher. Whereas again, through Zoom, if somebody has their computer in front of them, maybe you can use to your advantage the fact that you could use smaller fonts. But in general, the bigger the better. You need to keep in mind the presentation, not just what you have on your screen, but how it's going to look on the big screen when you're in a lecture hall presenting. It's good, and this is kind of what PowerPoint does for you now, is if you have a main bullet point, it's usually a larger font size, and then if you do a sub bullet, it usually pops it down to a smaller font size. But that's good to keep in mind too, just so people can see what the main point is in large text, and then if they want to read further, they have that smaller text that isn't as in your face. So again, going off of this rounded font theory here, a guide to fonts. If you look at the left side, personally, I think it's easier to read, easier on the eyes. Obviously, you can read both, but Times New Roman is on the right, and Arial is on the left. So personally, I like how the left looks better, but we're not gonna take points off if you use a different font. Just a thing to keep in mind. I think again, with PowerPoint, it usually chooses for you fonts more along the left side, Arial, Calibri. So just to kind of reiterate here, font's gone bad. Even with this in front of me as a Zoom meeting, this is still a pretty small font. You don't want that. Also, don't capitalize. I don't know why you would, but it looks like you're shouting. Don't use a complicated font. This looks busy. It's taking up space too. Again, the space is more for visuals and getting your point across. And then finally, please don't use Comic Sans. All right, so for presenting your data, again, this presentation is meant to just help the audience follow along with your data and really focus on the data, on the visuals. Provide figures and charts that will support your conclusions. So don't just put figures up for the sake of putting up figures. We know you guys are putting a lot of work into this. We know you're doing a lot, and you don't have to prove it with just putting a ton of figures on. Use impactful figures. Try to make each figure tell a story, prove your point, and make sure if you're putting it up there, it's up there for a good reason, and you're going to discuss it. You're not just going to say, here's a table. So with that, let's see what you think about this next slide. And normally this would be interactive, where I would ask you all to point out things that maybe you like or don't like. But I guess I will just do that for us. So first off, we again have just Times New Roman. So this looks like somebody took this out of their paper, or maybe their written report, and just copy and pasted the written description of their figure into PowerPoint. And that's not acceptable. That's kind of a red flag that you didn't really put too much time into this. And additionally, this is confusing. There's no context. Sure, I could read this, but this is going to take a lot of time as an audience to read, when really I just want to hear you explain this figure to me. And on top of that, there's a lot going on. We have A, B, and C. So I can tell that we have multiple figures going on if I were an audience member. And I'm kind of just feeling a little overwhelmed right now. So those are things to keep in mind. This is not a great presentation. It doesn't even really look that great. Again, it just kind of looks like it's been copy and pasted out of a written report. So if we edit this up a little bit, perhaps if you think these figures are crucial because they play a role into this telling the story of one another, and you want to show each figure in one slide, that's fine. But again, I've only got a couple bullet points here. This looks visually better. And now you as the presenter can take the time to just break down A, B, and C, how they're related, and what your conclusions are from these figures. So again, be generous with empty space. Don't cram too many things into one slide. It's okay to create that new slide and add more data if you need to. If that'll make it look better, I think that's totally worth it. And keep it simple. So if you can, like I keep saying, don't include an image, all of the images together. Try to include an image on every slide. That will keep it more interesting, and it'll help the flow of your presentation as well, instead of just keeping one slide up for 5 minutes where you're discussing 3 different figures. So here's another example where we also have graphs included with our charts. And again, there's a lot going on. So sure, I can tell this person did a lot of work, and that's awesome, but they should try to break this into multiple slides, provide bullet points, don't just take up all the space with figures, and this will help the flow of the presentation better. So here's a better example where, okay, A and B were pretty crucial to show together, so we'll have these on the left side, and then you can break it down by figure. Be sure to discuss the conclusions as they relate to each figure, and the fewer figures, the more impactful per slide. So again, this makes me focus on just A and B, and I can listen to what you have to say about it. And I'm not busy looking at, if we go back, at the bajillion figures, trying to figure them all out on my own. This helps me as an audience kind of just take it in and then listen to you and pay attention to what you have to say. All right, so with charts and graphs, we have some tips as well. What I notice a lot, so the great thing about Microsoft products is if you create a table in Excel, it's really easy just to kind of copy and paste it into PowerPoint. And I see that a lot, but the problem with that is just because it copy and pasted doesn't mean it's been just pasted in a PowerPoint format that's ready to go to present. It's usually not presentable yet. You need to think about what looks best. So say maybe in Excel, it just chose a font size of 8 for you. And if it pastes a font size of 8 on PowerPoint, you need to make that larger. And so that's on the flip side, the great thing about being able to copy and paste an actual chart or graph into PowerPoint is it's then interactive and you can edit it through PowerPoint. So don't just copy and paste figures from Excel and say, I'm good. There's still a lot of time that you should take, not a lot, you should use a reasonable amount of time to edit your figures to make sure they look good. For my research, I spend a lot of time on making my figures look good, and not just for to be publishable, but even just for presentations. I want to make sure that people can see my data and understand it well. I don't just want to copy and paste an Excel figure in there because it won't look good. And what's the point of pasting it if people can't read it? So that's an aspect you really need to keep in mind. I personally like it if you keep the font size consistent. So again, if Excel chose to do Times New Roman for you, maybe switch it to the same font that you've been using for your actual presentation text. Also be sure to blow up your figures and charts. Use the space you have. So again, if Excel pastes this little tiny chart here, make it big. Blow it up, and we'll go over some examples of that, but make sure people can see it. That's what really matters on that slide. And then make sure everything is labeled. So you want to make sure you have your axes labeled. You want to provide units. That's very important. And then it's usually good to have a title, and then also your legend if you have different points representing different data. So so yeah, your charts and your visuals are the main component of this presentation, and that's really what you should spend time on to make sure they look good and they're representing your data well, representing all your hard work that you did too. So here's an example of results gone bad. First of all, pie charts, I've never used a pie chart before, but let's say it was crucial for this presentation. First off, the legend makes no sense, and it probably made sense to the person who created it, but that's not the point. You need to think, again, always be thinking about your audience and make sure the legend makes sense to them. So maybe in Excel it was easy to put in a half, 3/8, and whatever your titles were that were short, but be sure to relabel them in a way that makes sense to your audience and makes it really easy for them to understand what's going on with your figure. Additionally, these percentages are really small. You could have, this text could have been blown up better. So there's a lot that still could be done with this figure to make it better. The pie chart's huge, which is great, but nothing else is really that easy to read. So I'm gonna keep drilling it down. Visuals are best. It's in your favor to use graphs rather than just charts and words and raw data. Don't just throw raw data out there. So usually for people, especially visual people, data in a graph is easier to comprehend and retain than raw data. And we do these for a reason, partially just because trends are easier to visualize in graph form. So, have fun, try to think about the best way to present your data, and be sure to ask us questions. Most of us, all of us have been analyzing data for a while now. So we have a good idea of in what situation you'd want to use a bar graph, maybe when you'd want to use a scatter plot. So don't be afraid to ask the best way to help visualize your data, because that's what we do. So here's an example of raw data gone bad. It's not really in context, but let's say for the sake of it, we're just providing a chart with raw data. And honestly, as an audience member, I've checked out. I see numbers, that's great, but what's the point? Show me why this matters. So instead of just providing a table, how about you turn it into a bar chart? So the items sold in the first quarter of 2012, we can see now, oh wow, March had a pretty high increase of balls sold. So try try to think of the best way to present your data visually. That's really easy to get the take-home message right away, so you can dive into the conclusions and why that conclusion matters to your client. Here's another bad example. Don't try to get too creative with Excel. So this gray background wasn't necessary. This fading color wasn't good. Just use your basic bar chart. That's good enough. And maybe it looks like this person spent so much time on trying to make it look fancy, that they kind of neglected their axes. There's text is too small, there's no actually labels, there's no title, and this legend's kind of just pretty small also. So there's a lot of work that could have been done to make this better, and that didn't mean adding funky colors. These axes are unnecessary too. There's just too many lines. It's super busy. You've got the numbers at the top of the bar, each individual bar. So what is even the point of these grid lines if you're just going to provide the number? So things to think about there. Again, ask us if you have any questions. And my head's in the way, probably, I think, my face shot for this slide. So that's another thing to keep in mind for Zoom that we'll discuss later. But either way, some more tips. If we go back to this figure we liked a little better, remove the grid lines if possible. I think actually the ones here are good. If we go back, this is too much. If you feel the need to add the numbers at the top of your bars, then I think it's acceptable to remove the grid lines. And then again, keep thinking about space, using space in the best way possible. So you could put this legend on the inside of your chart and then move it further to the right side here and then add some bullet points. Move this to the right and then put your bullet points to the left. So things to keep in mind: use your space wisely. Don't just throw graphs down and move on. Think about it so that it serves your presentation well. So a final example here, kind of going off of the raw data thing again, is you all will be producing your data sheets for the client, and those are normally printed out on a handout, which your client will have in front of them to look at while you're presenting. And this data sheet, I would not suggest just throwing it up on a PowerPoint slide. It's good to just break it down slide by slide, location by location, if you have some hot spots that you want to discuss, and we'll kind of hit on that on these next couple slides. So I would not just throw up your data sheet. Again, we know you've put a ton of time into this and we appreciate it, and that's where the handout comes in hand. That'll have your printed conclusions and data sheet on the other side. But for your presentation, that's not necessary. So instead, look at your data sheet and see, are there certain constituents of concerns that we want to talk about? Are there locations that we would like to have a specific slide to discuss these constituents on? So those are things to think about. Additionally, these colors are kind of hard to read anyways. So like this purple and green might be tough for people to read. So those are other things to keep in mind, just in terms of a visualization side of things. So if we were in your outline, you decided there were certain site descriptions you wanted to cover, and then discuss some, provide visuals of that. Help your client understand which location you're discussing. So it's good to, I personally think, to keep them engaged and bring them to your site location. And I realized for this year, even you guys weren't there, but we've provided you with videos to help you feel like you've been there. And again, don't feel worried, or please reach out to each TA if you need more information, if you want to go over the videos with them. And additionally, I have got a bullet point here, but if you need a figure for your presentation, please ask us to provide a screen, a frame of that image you want based on the video. So you all are watching YouTube videos, but we have higher quality versions of those videos on our computers. So we can take a frozen frame of whatever part of the site you want to provide to you for your presentation. So keep that in mind. And again, I'll provide examples of what I'm talking about here in this presentation, but I'm gonna keep pounding it down. Figures keep your audience engaged. It brings them to your site location and helps them know where you're talking about and how the data relates to that location. And then, so here's kind of a figure that we always put in the presentation about the percent of the class paying attention over time. So I think I don't remember the study, but I think it's kind of common to bring up that it's usually 10 to 12 minutes. That's the time frame you have before people start to lose attention. And so we can see it start to nosedive here around 10 minutes. So keep that in mind, try to stay engaging, and we'll cover that a little bit later too. But I want to point out this figure. So I think it's pretty easy to read. I hope you would agree right now. It seems like the font size is pretty good for this figure. And I actually edited this figure in PowerPoint. So this was the original figure. And the font size doesn't really, it's a little small. It doesn't look great. And it doesn't match the other font of my presentation. So what I did is I just, in PowerPoint, added text. And I added these axes just with a text box, and I added a new axis label for the Y and X axes with text boxes as well. So another thing I do a lot when I make presentations with my own data is I use PowerPoint kind of like Photoshop, where I will import my figure, and I especially work with RStudio, if you all have done it. It's a fancy Excel, basically, and a statistical program, but it produces figures as well. But the figures are hard to edit, so I will bring them into PowerPoint as a PDF, and then edit the axes, the labels, and the legends through PowerPoint. And in PowerPoint, you can save your final figure as a PDF and just drop that in your slide if you want. So again, don't just use Excel or whatever you use to create your figures. Don't use that as just whatever it created is what you get. Know that you can edit it further and make it look good. So don't be afraid to do that. I know that takes time, but it's really important, and I think it makes a big difference in your presentations. So going back to site descriptions and trying to bring your audience into the field with you to keep them engaged and then just better visualize what you're talking about. Here's an example where I think this was at maybe an Empire site from a while back ago, but they had these contrasting pHs of mixing water. And so instead of just providing a table and saying, site, water sample A31 and A32 had a pH of 6.5 and 5.5. Here you just have a figure, and you can quickly show your clients, who should recognize the site, oh wow, okay, so the pH here was 6.5, the pH here is 5.5, and then whatever we've got over here mixing into the other locations is 4.5. So this is a quick, easy way to get the message across and also stay engaging. Personally, I think if you can, it's great to just blow up your figures, and I prefer how this looks better. You can decide, either works, but again, just try to think of ways to be more engaging, make it as clear as possible to get your point across. Here's another example I really like. This is again at one of our old Empire mine sites. So again, I prefer to leave no loose space. And I know again this year you guys weren't able to be there and take your own pictures, but again, ask us for screenshots of your videos, and show where you were, where we were for you, so people know what you were talking about. So this provides more space to show what you want. It can be more engaging because you can discuss portions within the image too that are of interest, possibly. All right, so moving on to colors and schemes. So PowerPoint provides themes for you to choose, and I'll discuss that a little bit further here. But with those themes, it might choose colors and fonts for you, and so it's just good to keep in mind to use a color of font that contrasts with the background, that's easy to read. So black on white, white on black. It's good. Change your text as you need. Again, with figures like these, I provided a text box that I have just a transparency applied to it. So it was a white text box that I applied 50% transparent in the edit. You all should know this, but if you edit a text box, you can format the fill and add a transparency. So here you can kind of see through it, and this makes it so you can see the text better. With these, we changed the font to white so you could just see it contrast with the figure. So be sure to change your font so people can read it. Be consistent with your color schemes. You can use color to emphasize a point if you want, but use it occasionally. And then be sure that your photos are not too dark to see on the projector. I know with a lot of the Empire sites, when people were getting snowed or rained on in past years, or if it was cloudy, which might be the case for some of the sites your TAs collected videos for, you can also edit the images in PowerPoint and make them brighter, have a lower contrast if you need to. So keep that in mind too, like, you know, if your photos need to be impactful and if they can't see it very well, you know, that won't get your point across. In the lecture hall, again, that the screen usually affects the photos, so you guys won't have to worry about that as much. I think your figures will probably look fine, but for future self, again, keep in mind it's always good to go into the location you will be presenting and see how it looks on the big screen. Because when you do that, you might realize, like we did for our presentation, that all of the figures were very dark once they were on the big screen. So we had to brighten them up. So good tips to keep in mind beyond field session. So yeah, backgrounds. Again, think about the theme. If you're choosing a PowerPoint theme, choose like a good one that's professional. Don't choose one that's flashy or too crazy. And keep it consistent throughout the entire presentation. Unless, for example, I showed you when you provide a field site location, if you fill that slide up with just the full picture, that's fine. I suggest using a Colorado School of Mines template. So if you just Google here, Colorado School of Mines PowerPoint templates, that's where I got this template you see here. And I think this is useful for any presentation you present through the School of Mines for a class. This just helps your presentation look more professional. The client, you know, immediately knows who you're with and who you're representing. And so they've got a lot of options to choose from. All right, so citations. If you provide a figure that you got either from that you just got online or from a written report, be sure to cite it. So this came from, this is the last name of the person who wrote the report and then the year. And then you can provide the full citation at the end. You know, you can have a citation slide for the full citation. If you got maybe a stock photo, or just a photo you Googled online, you can provide the website. Or if you've got data from, say, the U.S. Forest Service, you can say image courtesy or provided by the U.S. Forest Service, and then provide the URL. And then again, after your question side, have your full citation list so that if people want to go and look at your citations, they can. A few pet peeves when doing bullet points: do not use periods. They're not supposed to be full sentences. They're just bullet points meant to help you, again, follow along with your presentation. Do not use distracting animations. Keep it professional and be consistent with your font size, your type, and your colors. And remember to proofread. And I'm really going to stress practice, practice, practice. So you can see down here, I got this just from, you know, a random website. So here's the link to that website. So you know that, you know, where I got this figure from. Another thing, so I know you all will be working collectively, and so there's a high probability that you will be using Google Slides, and that's awesome. It's a great feature, and it's a great way for you all to work together, especially it's especially for this year because you all are working together virtually. So I highly recommend using Google Slides, but when it comes to presentation day, there's, and this is even for future self, there's a pretty good possibility it will not present as planned. And so again, it's a little different through Zoom. You all will have more control since it'll be through your computer, but usually when you try to present through Google Slides, it doesn't look as good as an actual PowerPoint slide. So the best bet is you can convert Google Slides to a PowerPoint file. But sometimes that will mess up your images, your formatting, and equations. So if you convert to a PowerPoint for your master presenter who will be presenting the slides, maybe keep that in mind, that it might mess things up when you switch to a PowerPoint. The best bet I normally suggest is just to, when you're presenting in person, especially, convert to a PDF. So once you all are done working together, you all are happy with your final product, assign one person to convert it to a PDF. And usually things convert pretty seamlessly from Google Slides to PDF, and then you can present that. But again, things to think about and not to think about the day of when you're presenting. These are things you need to think about well before the presentation so that you're prepared and there's no surprises the day of. And so finally, it's all about you. And a lot of these points are going to be good for future self, since Zoom is presenting it's a good opportunity for you all to work on your virtual presentation skills. But in general, for even if you've got your little face up in the corner like I do for this presentation, or in person, face the audience and make eye contact. Do not just stand there and be rigid, but don't flail around either. If you have a laser pointer, use it sparingly. And with the virtual presentations, you can use a laser pointer. I personally think it's distracting. I think the mouse works fine if you want to use the mouse here and there. But for me, it's distracting to just see that bullet point there. But you can do that if you want. Watch for weird fidgets and ticks. And this is more important for in person, but even just for this presentation virtually, you might do things that make a lot of noise, which the microphone might pick up. So if you're really fidgeting and moving your computer again around, I'm banging on it. I don't know if you can hear this, or it looks like I have an earthquake going on right now. Try to just stand still. These are things you should do in person anyways. Just try to stand there, present yourself well, look at everyone in the eye, or look your green Zoom dot in the eye, and just try your best to be professional. And especially since you'll be at home, just really watch for weird tics that you might have. And since you can record, you can practice and really easily see maybe some weird things you're doing. But if you're scratching your head all the time, or I don't know, doing strange things. I know one person for his presentation had a noisy suit jacket, and the whole time you could just hear his suit jacket making noise, and it was actually kind of hard to hear him. So those are all things to think about when you're presenting, and just you want them to focus on you and what you're saying. And this is not so this Zoom presentation you all will be doing is not an opportunity for you all to write notes and just read, thinking, oh, well, no one's going to see me reading, right? No, we want you to still practice. Please practice and try to make it a presentation like you would in person, where you've practiced this, you know what you're going to say, and your slides are guiding you, and you are talking to the audience. You are not having your notebook on your computer and reading your notebook as you talk to the audience. That's not going to sound good. That's not what this Zoom is an opportunity for. This is a chance for you to still work on your presentation skills, even if it's virtual. And also, don't read the slides. Your audience can read for themselves. Again, use them as just bullet points to guide your discussion. All right, so we're going to add an additional slide to the Zoom and the virtual considerations here. So it's good to familiarize yourself with the screen sharing feature. And I'm going to try, so with the screen sharing feature, if you bring up your Zoom meeting, you can see at the bottom of it, it'll say share screen. And if you click on that, it will allow you to share your screen. So you can choose if you want to share a desktop, or I am just sharing this PowerPoint presentation with you all. And then the viewer should be able to see what you're sharing. And so I strongly encourage you to practice this by yourselves. And then as a group, when you present and practice, make sure that you know how to do the screen sharing feature and make sure it's working. With that, familiarize yourself with the recording feature. So again, when you start, usually when you start a Zoom meeting, especially if you're the leader or the manager of the meeting, it'll say it's recording, and you can tell it to stop recording and you can tell it to start recording again. And I will provide just a quick overview of all of these at the end of this by just sharing my screen again through Zoom. Be sure to choose a professional background. So back here, this is actually my field site in Crested Butte. So this is a photo I took, and it's good to maybe consider a virtual background like I have right here if you're in your apartment and you can't find a good place to sit that's professional. If you have a bare wall, that's great. If you want to put up a sheet, that's fine. So just things to think about to make sure that you look professional virtually. Also think about roommates. If you have noisy roommates or if your apartment's really loud, that's an issue for me. Try to choose the most quiet location you can and tell your roommates like, hey, I've got a very important presentation from this time to this time. Please try to be quiet. It's important. I want to get a good grade. Again, this is not an opportunity to wear your pajama bottoms during your presentation. So still dress as though this would be in person. And this isn't just, I mean, you want to look good, but this also will put you in the mode. So I've done a couple presentations, pretty important presentations now through Zoom, and I still dressed up for this the situation as if it was in person. And not only did it make me look professional, but it put me in the mode for my presentation. So if I was in my pajamas, honestly, I'd probably just be slumped and presenting and mumbling. But I was dressed up. I felt good. I felt like I had a fun event for the day in my apartment, and it put me in the mode for presenting. And I think it just improved my presentation altogether. So dress up. Still dress. I think it's business casual, but men, wear your collared shirts with a tie, maybe a suit jacket. Girls, be sure, and this is important for future self too, outside of Zoom, wear appropriate clothing. Women especially, make sure your dresses or skirts, if you're wearing those, are below the knees. Make sure you're not wearing spaghetti straps. Wear a suit jacket over your dress. Look professional. We have real clients. You want to look good for them. And practice together. You want to be prepared for any weird Zoom thing before your actual presentation. So again, for one of my important presentations that I had to present with several people, I practiced with some friends. So I called them up, shared my meeting, went through the same thing and presented to them so that if there were any weird things, I sorted them out then. Also, a good thing to keep in mind is internet connection. So you do not want your internet to fail during your presentation or during other people's presentations. So I strongly suggest taking all devices off the internet if you have not great internet, which I do. So when I present, I have my phone, my iPads, my roommate's things have to, sorry pal, but he has to get off his internet connection as well. So just things to keep in mind. If you practice, you'll be fully prepared for any weird things that might be thrown at you during the actual day of your presentation. So just to wrap this up, a couple more tips. Again, practice. Please practice, guys. It is only going to help you. And I know you're going to be tired of your data. You're going to just be over it, but please just keep practicing. It'll make it so worth it on that final day. And finally, keep your data in mind. So again, keep in mind why this all matters. And when you're presenting, be sure to introduce your figures, explain your axes, explain the legend, and then explain the data. So don't just throw a figure up there and say, all right, this is cool stuff. Explain what we're looking at and why it matters. And then finally, why do your conclusions matter? So your talk will be about 15 or more minutes, I believe. Check me on that. But again, be sure to avoid having people lose their interest. So stay energetic, talk clearly, and use as many visuals as possible, which we covered, I'd say, pretty extensively. If you see someone snoozing, or I guess if you hear someone snoozing, start talking louder. Your enthusiasm will be contagious, even beyond Zoom meetings. If you're in person, if you see people are starting to unfortunately these days, if you see people on their phones or not paying attention, I try to um, speak a little louder and just try to move things along quicker so that people will start to get my attention again. Um, and as you know, as audience members as well, please remember to stay off your phones. It's not nice, and it's just good to give everyone their full attention on their last day of presentations. All right, so conclude. Use an effective and strong closing. Relate back to the bigger picture. Why does this matter? So you've answered, hopefully, the objectives for your client, but tell them why this matters and try to think proactively about maybe some suggestions for future work. So, you've answered their questions, but how can they go further? How do you think they should move on from here? Try to show that you're thinking beyond just the objectives. Also use your conclusion slide to summarize your main points, the main objectives, and then, like I said, suggest your future steps. And with that, normally I would open this up to questions for you all, but feel free to contact me or your TAs if you have any questions. Here's a fun little picture I took when I did field session many years ago, back in the day. Thanks guys for listening to that presentation. I know it was long, but you would have been normally stuck in a room with me presenting that for an hour anyways, so be sure to watch it all. And I actually couldn't figure out how to share Zoom itself. It's easy to share your screen and your desktop, but because of the presentation side of things, it tries to hide the Zoom features so people don't actually see it during your presentation, which is good. So I'll work on that, and if I can provide a video, I will. But otherwise, it's pretty self-explanatory, and again, don't be afraid to ask. But again, if you've created a meeting, you will have some options at the bottom of your screen, which I'm looking at right now. And there's a share screen option with a green arrow. And when you click that, it'll give you an option to share either your PowerPoint document or just your desktop completely. And so if you click on the PowerPoint that you'll be presenting on, there'll be a blue button that says share in the bottom right corner, and then you can share it. Additional features are that you can edit whether it's recording or not for the meeting. And if you click on the recording option, you can tell it to record to this computer. So once you share your screen, you can click on the top. There's an option to record to the computer. Once you're done with your presentation, you hit stop recording. And when you end the meeting, it will save, like I think I already discussed, it'll save that meeting to a Zoom file. There's other features to look at and mess with beforehand. When you're on Zoom, as you guys should know, you have the mute option and the stop the video option. If you click on the arrow next to that video image, that's where you can choose a virtual background. And so it'll say, again, that arrow next to stop video on the bottom left side of the Zoom. You can choose a virtual background and upload your own background with a plus sign. That's by the other options. So again, mess around with Zoom, prepare for this all before your presentation day, and please feel free to email me or your TAs if you need help figuring out how to use Zoom and prepare for that presentation. All right, thanks guys, bye.